Yeah.
Anyway, let me introduce my dear friend Bill Ziegler, who is the senior vice president at Brookfield Zoo, and we got to know each other around pangolins because I'd gotten back from Africa very frustrated that I hadn't seen one. And my guide had put me up on an anthill in the middle of a wide open field because he'd seen the tail marks. And it was large enough that if the lion was coming, we'd all have plenty of time to take evasive measures. Bill, what I think you'll enjoy knowing about this marvelous group of people is that thanks to me, they all know the difference between a penguin and a pangolin. So we've been educating people one animal at a time. But I got back from that trip and said to Stuart, who is president of the zoo, Stuart, do we have any pangolins? And he said, no, but we certainly want them. Talk to Bill. And long story short, we now have a very effective breeding program with pangolins. I have had the honor of naming them. They're named for just about everybody in the family and a few friends. I had said it at a zoo dinner, it's very disconcerting to come for a tour of the zoo. And whereas David Pangolin had been on exhibit, I was told that he was off exhibit because David's off mating. So, you learn to cope.
First things first.
I was glad he was happy. Anyway, Bill, will you take over? I am so excited about this presentation, which is pangolins, poachers, and plague.
Sure. Well, obviously, pangolins have been a big part of Barbara and myself's last 4 years, basically. We started this program in 2014. We began talking about pangolin and the status of pangolin at the time, and the fact that in zoological institutions, pangolins had not fared well. In fact, the only pangolin at that time was a male at the San Diego Zoo who had been there for about 10 years. He'd been a confiscation of a shipment of 10 pangolins that had come in the country. And very quickly, 9 of the pangolins had passed away, which has been the story with pangolins. They have just basically have done terrible in terms of under professional care, whether it's at a rehab facility in the countries of origin, or someone has tried to collect them and bring them in to create a breeding program in zoological parks. The only institution up until this time that had had any success was the Taipei Zoo, and they had the Chinese pangolin and have been working with that animal for about 12 years, although they've had lost over that period of time quite a few of them. But overall, I just wanted to make sure everyone understood that, this consortium, and I'll get into these definitions of words and things as we go, and our involvement wouldn't occur without the support of Barbara Kipper. There's no doubt about it. It's been her interest, her passion, her drive, her support financially for the program that allowed us to get started and create a consortium with other institutions. So we always thank Barbara, and as she said, she's got a whole family living at the zoo right now. And so every animal that's born here, she gets the name. So it's been quite interesting, some of the names that have come up. So again, thank you so much, Barbara, for all that. Essentially, a consortium in zoological terms is just basically a group that formed to undertake something where the resources of one institution are just not enough in order to do it. To give you an idea, they're essentially breeding programs, but they're not formal programs within our zoological association called the American Zoo and Aquarium Association of Zoos and Aquariums, where they have programs that are called species survival plans. And they've selected certain species that they manage across North America. A consortium is not a species survival plan. It normally doesn't have as many people involved. SSPs, as we call them for an acronym, usually revolve around large numbers of animals like gorillas. We are involved with an SSP for gorillas. And that population is managed across North America as one population, even though the animals live in multiple institutions. So we analyze them genetically and demographically and work to develop a self-sustaining population. And that's critical for us in that we do not want to burden or put pressure on wild species. We want to reduce the amount of take that occurs in the wild. There's still a tremendous amount of illegal and trafficking of animals, both legal and illegal. And zoos have done their best to remove themselves from that process. But there are times when we take a look at a particular species where nothing is known about them. And the only way to really save them in the wild is to learn about the animal, the reproductive physiology, their habits, how they communicate, disease issues, how much area they need. And in order to do that, you have to have your hands on them. And so we do bring animals in occasionally, which is what we did here for this particular one. So as you can see, there's a couple of other consortiums out there, one involving the ocelot out of South America, and also the Philippine crocodile right now, which only has 4 zoos. But let's talk about pangolins. So what are pangolins? You know, pangolins used to be thought to be related to anteaters and sloths, armadillos, things that were also insectivores, or animals that tended to move slowly, have little protection, and like to eat ants and fruit. But that's not what they are at all. As a matter of fact, they form their own order, Philodonta, and their closest relatives, believe it or not, are carnivores: cats, dogs, bears. Looking at the animal that's on the screen right now, you wouldn't imagine that. But that is, when you look at the lineage of these animals and how they developed over millions of years, they originally came from the carnivore section. Where do they live? Well, you know, pangolins live in the woods, they live in savanna, they live in scrub habitat. Right now, there's 8 species of pangolin. There are 4 in Africa and 4 in Asia. But when you look at the genetics of these animals, which we are beginning to do, this is one of the least studied animals, mammals in the world right now. We're actually beginning to find that there's probably more than the 8 species that are there. The other problem with this animal is it's also the most trafficked animal in the world. So you can find them throughout sub-Saharan Africa, the African species. Almost every country. In fact, the pangolin that they set Barbara up on the mound to go see was probably a giant pangolin, or what's called a ground pangolin or Timonix penguin there in Africa. But you can also find them in India, Myanmar, Thailand, Borneo, and Kalimantan, China, of course, and throughout Southeast Asia. Unfortunately, it is the Southeast Asian species that are the most endangered because they are hunted. One of the unique features about pangolin is they have no teeth. And as I said, they eat ants and termites, but their tongue is as long as their body. It's much longer than an anteater's tongue. In fact, that tongue goes all the way back and attaches just above the back hips of the animal. compared to our tongue that attaches in our throat and our larynx, and even for anteaters. So there's some really unique things about these animals. And as we begin to learn more and more about their physiology, it's becoming really surprising, some of the uniqueness that they've been able to do. But what makes a pangolin unique? Well, unfortunately, pangolins are the most illegally trafficked animal in the world right now. Most of the Asian pangolins, as I said before, are extremely endangered because they've been collected for their meat. They're considered a gourmet food item, but primarily because the Asians feel that the scales have medicinal purposes. And they'll take those scales like you would a rhino horn, grind it up, and it can basically cure just about anything according to them. So it makes it very, very hard after years and generations of cultures that believe this. So when you take a look at some of these things, here's just a list of some of the things that they feel that pangolins can cure by ingesting either a pangolin meat or pangolin scales. And it's, you know, everything that you see here is absolutely not true. The scale is nothing more than your fingernail, keratin, basically. And so if you really wanted to cure something and keratin had that capability, you could take clippings off of your fingernails, grind them up, and go ahead and medicate yourself. But that's quite not where they're at. So unfortunately, the other issue with pangolins is the bushmeat trade. Not only are they considered a gourmet item in Asia, but they are a protein source, especially in Africa, where the farmers, if they come across them, will gather them and cook them up in their pots. Unfortunately, because the Asian species have been so hunted, the Asians are now moving into Africa. And they discovered that these animals were located in bushmeat markets. And so they've gone into villages around Africa, especially in West Central Africa, and have begun to pay a price for the locals there to collect them. And unfortunately, what they're paying them is far more than they can earn in a month or even 2 or 3 months as a farmer. So it's well worth the locals' while to collect the pangolins and sell them to the local Asian middleman. So if you take a look at where the pangolins are and the issues that have been going on, this is a list of confiscation areas. And over the last 5 years, because we begin to pay more and more attention to pangolins, there's been more and more confiscations, obviously. These things have been confiscated in the terms of tons. I mean, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 pounds of just scales. Now, if you look at a normal pangolin, there's about 900 scales on a pangolin. If you take all those scales off and weigh them, it's less than a pound. If you can imagine 4,000 or 6,000 pounds of nothing but scales, how many animals it took to actually do that. They're estimating over the last 10 years, when they first began to study pangolin, about 2 million pangolins had been taken. We think it's much higher than that. We think in any given year right now, there's probably 700,000, maybe more pangolins taken a year. Just in 2017, CITES, that's the Convention on the International Trade of Endangered Species. CITES is a voluntary organization of which the United States belongs to. There's 127 signatories to the agreement. CITES declared them as what's called a CITES 1, which is the highest protection level that you can get. And CITES deals primarily in commercial trade. Now, even though the laws in commercial trades are getting stricter, just like ivory for elephants, the local laws in terms of still collecting them for bushmeat are not quite the same. So there's still a tremendous amount of pressure on these animals, but this can give you some idea. The little pangolins there you see on the bottom right-hand side, those are going to the food market. They've actually had the scales taken off of them. The middle shot is nothing but bags and bags of scales. And then the shot on the left is actually, they start out as live pangolins because the meat markets, and we'll get into that towards the end of this talk, like to have their animals live. They have fresh meat, so to speak. Unfortunately, when they're wrapped up like this, they only last about a week or two before they succumb. Pangolins are super, super sensitive, and they just don't make it. So most of these animals tend to arrive out of Africa already dead, unfortunately. So we got together, and like I said, in 2014, and we said, you know, we need to start doing something to help conserve pangolins. And unfortunately, because nobody knows anything about them, the only way to learn is to get your hands on them. So we and 6 other institutions and then one private nonprofit got together and formed this consortium. And the consortium, you can see, is Turtleback Zoo in New Jersey, Memphis Zoo in Tennessee. The Gladys Porter Zoo is in Brownsville, Texas. The Pittsburgh Zoo, obviously Pittsburgh. Pangolin Conservation is a nonprofit organization that is down in St. Augustine, Florida. So we sat down and said, you know, we want to bring pangolin in. What do we have to do in order to accomplish that? And we began having to look at what would be the correct pangolin to work with. And we chose the white-bellied tree pangolin. We chose that species because it's the most common of the pangolins. We certainly didn't want to go out and try to work or collect any of the pangolin that were much rarer to work with. So the white-bellied tree pangolin is still considered common. It's found in Western Central Africa. We chose the country of Togo to collect from. Togo is a very small country, and the Chinese buyers have not really gotten into Togo when we started this program. They have begun to show up now, but we've also worked very hard with the Togolese and with the locals in that area to tell them that it's not a good thing to sell pangolins to the Chinese. So Togo pangolin are still relatively common at this point in time. But we picked these animals and said, you know, how would we bring them in? So we sent a young man over to Togo for about 4 months. And the idea was that he would go out and begin to collect these animals from the farmers. He wouldn't go out in the wild and find them, and he wouldn't pay the farmers. He would convince the farmers that, you know, it's not really good to collect them, and if you want protein, we can provide you with a goat or some other type of protein, but we didn't pay them money. So on the bottom left-hand corner there is some of the habitat in Togo where these pangolin are found. So it was a program where we went in and actually collected about over 100 pangolin. And we had to take a look at certain efforts in order to keep them healthy while we had them. So we began looking at husbandry care, veterinary treatment, physiology, reproductive behavior, nutrition. And so as the young man collected pangolin from the farmers, he would begin to convert them to a new diet that we'd created. Prior to this, most of the diets that pangolins had been fed were the same as things like anteaters and the armadillos, and it just wasn't the right diet. So we created a new diet. He went over, and as he got them, he converted them onto this diet. He deparasiticized them. So in other words, he would treat them for internal parasites, and he'd also treat them for external parasites. And more importantly, he began to watch their behavior. Pangolin are actually very unique animals. They have very distinct characteristics. And in some cases, they actually like people. And so those animals that acclimated well to the new diet, that responded well to him, and didn't continue to curl up in a ball, which is one of the defensive mechanisms, you know, and not eat and seem stressed all the time, those were the pangolins he began to keep. The rest of the pangolin, he took them back out where they'd been found and let them go. So this was a critical part of our program because up until now, everyone across the world had said, you cannot go in and collect these pangolins and have them survive. It just isn't going to happen. And get them into the United States. So we took a very long time to acclimate them. And before they were actually shipped, these animals were eating our good diet. They had lost all their parasites, and they were interacting with Justin Miller, who's the young man we sent over there. So they were getting very calm around people, which was just incredibly important. So what we did in that process is once they were ready to go, they were put in individual crates, and we shipped in 45 pangolin at one time. And as I said, everyone had told us that you're just not going to be successful. You're going to die. You shouldn't do this. The fact is, we didn't lose one pangolin. They came in, every pangolin survived. Not only did they survive, but we found out within a few months that we had a number of pregnant pangolin that came in. And they held their babies and went to full term. There were no abortions. There were no problems with them. And so we considered ourselves very lucky, of course, at the time. And as the group started to take a look at what we wanted to do, we said, you know, we've got to sign a memorandum of understanding, this consortium, and we have to agree to do certain things as a group if they're going to stay members. So the original consortium members, the 7 institutions, all signed a memorandum of understanding that said, we promise to do these following things. If they do not, they lose their pangolins, because the pangolins belong to the consortium. They don't belong to individuals. And so once you sign this memorandum of understanding and commit your institution, commit conservation efforts, commit funds towards this, then you're part of the overall program and can work with the pangolins. So we want to find out in our what's called XC2 breeding program, or that's actually a reproduction program under professional care. What were the best genetics for the animals? The demographic management of them, of course, looking at husbandry, welfare, and nutrition. Now, one thing we did was we're the first organization to ever collect animals and have all the GPS locations of every animal we collected. So we know where every animal came from. And this is critical as we get into genetics down the road, and we find out, we're beginning to find out now that we're actually seeing 2 different species of white-bellied tree pangolin next to in the neighboring countries of Togo. So having that location, and once we get into genetic sampling of animals across those areas, we can make sure that we have all the right species together in our program. And so the consortium is going to look at XC2 breeding, advancements in research, and of course, education and interpretive. And as Barbara said, most of the times in the past when you talked about pangolin, they would look at you and go, oh, okay, a penguin. No one in North America had ever heard of a pangolin. So part of our program is getting our education information out there, sharing that on social media, sharing that in the public. We're the only zoo right now that actually exhibits the pangolin. All the other consortium members do not exhibit them. So we have in our exhibit area all kinds of interpretive there that talks about the consortium, what it does, what our goals are for that, and try to introduce people about pangolins in general. And believe it or not, we've had people come across the United States. We've had kids from the state of Washington. I've had kids from Arizona. I've had kids from Pennsylvania and New York that have come to Brookfield just to see pangolin. And we take our time when they come in and begin talking to them and tell them about it. And they actually go out and start fundraising to help conserve pangolins. So we want to, again, going back to the consortium, we'll look in our collaborative development. Part of what we do is research on the pangolin in its native habitat. We do research on reproductive history, disease. One of the things that nobody knew is how do they communicate? These are lone animals. They don't come together as a group. They're not gregarious. And so how do they find each other? Or how does a female who is receptive to reproduction, how is she letting a male know that she's ready and able to breed? So these are some of the things that we're beginning to take a look at. In fact, what we found out was that females have a postpartum heat, which means right after they give birth, within 7 to 9 days, they're ready to breed again. We also found out for the first time that the gestation period is about 8 months. So that means she will wean her baby within a 6.5, 7 month period. She will be pregnant in the process. And as soon as that baby's weaned, within another 2 or 3 months, she'll give birth again. This is a reproductive rate that no one ever knew occurred with pangolins. And it's one reason why they're still out there right now in Africa. So if we can slow down the illegal take of the animals, and they have lived for years and years with subsistence take, which means the locals taking them for their own meat. But if we slow down the demand from Asia, we actually think that the animals will survive without a problem, even being a bush meat product, because that's been going on for thousands of years. But the reproductive rate is what surprises the most. So here are just some of the sites that we were picking up our animals from. You can see Benin is on one side, Ghana's on the other. We think the species, you'll see that dark area there that kind of looks like a lake. We think just on the other side in that in Ghana that the pangolin there, even though they were considered white-bellied tree pangolin, are now a unique, distinct species because of the genetic information that we've gotten back. And so that's why it was so important to know where our animals were located so that we're not hybridizing a species with another species. So the animals, like I said, were put in crates. They were brought in all at one time. They came into the Los Angeles airport, and it seems like a strange way to do it. You know, people would have thought they had to come in across the Atlantic into Miami or into New York. But it was actually faster to get them into the LA airport. A broker from there worked with us, and every crate had a name of the institution they were going to. So the broker divided up the crates, turned right around inside of 2 hours, had them back on the plane, and then arriving at the institutions. We wanted to make sure they spent as little time traveling as possible. We had to obtain our proper permits to do this, and to identify those things with the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, which we did. We brought our animals in April of 2016. So this took 2 years because we started in 2014 planning this whole thing. So it took 2 years to really get to it and execute it. And we also brought in another group in November of that same year for a total of 45 animals. In January of 2017, after we'd brought the animals in, that is when CITES declared all pangolin species, both the Asian and the African, as a CITES 1 species. And so now you cannot import them without going through a strict permit process. And in most cases, that permit process just isn't going to happen. So what are the challenges and the achievements that we've been able to come up with? Well, within the program, we've now, unfortunately, we've had 19 deaths. That's to be expected with a new species that you know anything about. But some of those deaths were some of the offspring that were first born, not the original animals. But at the same time, we've had 17 births, which everyone said would never occur. And not only have we had the births, we had 3 pregnant females that came in during the importation, but we've now had breeding at our facilities and reproduction there. So that's how we learned exactly what the gestation period was. Just in the last year, we've had 3 births here at Brookfield Zoo. And 10 of those, in the consortium, 10 of those occurred at Brookfield Zoo with known conception dates and videos of the births. The current population of animals is 34. Brookfield Zoo maintains 10 of those. In fact, we've sent 4 animals out now to other consortium members to make sure that we're able to pair up animals and that we can keep the breeding going. So as I said, 10 of those births have occurred at Brookfield Zoo. Brookfield Zoo has also become the center for breeding. Unfortunately, the other institutions, except for perhaps the Columbus Zoo, which has had a birth, they had a birth this fall, early spring in January. They just really found that they didn't have the wherewithal to do as much as they could from a husbandry standpoint, from a veterinarian standpoint. So we've taken the lead in working on reproductive physiology. And in fact, we have brought animals now in from the other institutions, have gotten them pregnant, and have sent them back to their original institutions. We found that if we can transport the animals in their first trimester, that the transportation is safe and the mother does well, as does the baby. And we're going to be doing this more and more now to make sure that every female out there is pregnant. When you develop a self-sustaining population, you want to look at your demographic structure and make sure that you're recruiting into the breeding population as much as you can. So you've got to maximize the number of births that you have. So we've become, like I said, the breeding center for those zoos. We've also become the nutritional center. We're the only zoo of the consortium that has a PhD nutritionist, Dr. Jen Watts. Jen has been working with a number of companies in creating a vitamin mineral supplement, which we're just about to start adding to the diet. We've gone with a company called Missouri, which is a subsidiary of Purina. Missouri is in Richmond, Indiana, and they only develop exotic animal diets. And so we've worked very closely with them in developing a micronutrient supplement that we think is still needed for the animals. So let's talk about diets a little bit. What we're finding out is diet is the main factor for their survival, because their foods of termites and ants is so particular. We can't always duplicate that. However, we do find a lot of insects that we're buying now, but we have to take a look at what else we need to supplement. And so fat-soluble vitamins has been important, the calcium-iron relationships, the protein to fat contents, and very extremely important, because we found out that pangolins get fat very quickly, and that's not good for them. And unfortunately, you have to be very careful in taking the weight off of them, because if you do it too fast, that fat breaks down and gets into the liver and causes you all kinds of problems. So we also had to find something that was palatable and digestible, obviously, once they got here. So we are looking at sources for all kinds of ants and termites and things that we can find. China has become a big source, as also North America over the last 20 years, because of the reptile and amphibian industry, has developed a lot of small businesses that specialize in things like botfly, bottlefly, grub worms, silkworms, things that 20 years ago, 10 years ago weren't available, that we can give to the pangolin, as well as anteaters and other stuff. So we're able to create a much better diet. The other challenges we face, we found in the first 2 kids that were born, weaning process has to be managed very carefully. Otherwise, you will lose your baby pangolin. In the wild, they hang on and climb on to their mother and travel with their mom. But at a certain point in time, while mother's eating ants, the kids learn to eat ants. Unfortunately, that's not quite the case under professional care. And so when it's time, the mother says for that kid to get off of her, she begins to push the baby off. It hasn't learned to eat on its own yet. So we've had to begin to train these kids how to eat ants and how to eat their diet that we provide them. So it's become a real challenge, but we've been pretty successful at it. Here's some of the ingredients that we go after. Like I said, the blue bottle fly, soldier fly, mealworms, silkworms, chitin. We use formic acid and water, as well as rice hulls. Now, people would kind of look at you and go, why do you provide rice hulls? Well, you have to have a filler to a certain extent. And we also use diatomaceous earth. What we found is that, of course, pangolins, when they're getting termites and ants from the termite mounds or from an ant hole, they're picking up dirt at the same time. And that dirt has a lot of micronutrients in it. So we've been able to take diatomaceous earth, which, if any of you are familiar at all with the aquarium industry, diatomaceous earth is used as a filtration substrate in some aquariums. And we've actually mixed that into the diet, which has seemed to help quite a bit. So We've now gotten to the point where we think our diet is fairly good after 3 years of having them, actually 4 years of having them. We're still tweaking it, but so far so good. The other thing that we want to take a look at in some of our achievements is we've created all kinds of things to look at welfare. The little thing that you see, the little orange thing you see on the bottom left-hand side is the special feeder. And you would ask, why would you build something like that? Well, this goes back to making the female take her time when she eats, so she can't gobble it all up at once. And then that allows the pangolin pup, and that's what they're called, pups, that allows them to eat at the same time because mom's not sitting there in a small bowl and eating everything all at once, and the pup doesn't get a chance to do it. The little feeder you see in the middle, that's another important thing. It allows the animals, it requires the animals to take a lot of time to eat. And we place these around their environments and fill them full of ant larvae, ants themselves, ant pupa, silkworms, things like that. And they forage for it, which is what they would normally do in the wild. So we want to create some natural behaviors. We want them to be active and exercise. Otherwise, as I said before, they tend to get fat really quick. And so these are some of the things that we provide to slow them down and to give them things to do. The other one you see there is actually Gladys Porter figured this out. Gladys Porter, a consortium member in Brownsville, Texas, was having problems, and they figured out if they put the ants and the food in a Ziploc bag and hang it loosely, it's more difficult to feed from. So it makes them work at it more. And it takes time for them to eat, which is what we want to do. So it doesn't have to be high tech. It could be low tech. The important thing is just engaging them and keeping their activity levels up. The other things, of course, challenges-wise with veterinarian, general medicine, disease issues that we found. Being in our environment, we tend to have some toe problems. We had to learn how to draw blood and where to draw blood from. And as you can see, we use what's called a caudal vein in the tail now. That's the safest way to draw blood for the animals. We've learned to tube feed animals because we had some animals that just decided after they had been here a while they weren't going to eat. And we had to figure out how to tube feed them in order to keep their energy up so we could treat them and get them back in the process. Brookfield Zoo is also the only zoo in the world to have performed a cesarean section successfully. We had a pregnant mother. The calf was a dystocia. It turned around and wasn't presenting properly. And so we went in and actually did a cesarean on the female. The pup has done fine. This was about 2.5, 3 years ago. And fortunately, since then, we haven't had to do it. But mother and baby did fine. And the mother's also gotten pregnant again. So there was another first, and we are figuring these things out. A lot of this information, when it comes to conservation efforts, is information that we're also passing on back to the countries of origin. Rehab centers have started to crop up all around Africa right now and in Asia. One of the biggest is actually in Thailand, in Bangkok, where these animals, when they get confiscated by the government for being illegally taken, they have to be rehabilitated because normally they're in pretty bad shape by the time they're confiscated. And so how to treat them, the type of medicines that need to be done, how to tube feed them, draw blood, check their status. These are all things that we're now providing these rehab centers in Africa. So they have greater success at being able to reintroduce these animals back into the wild. Births and weaning. This is a little pup here on the left-hand side. The nipples are like an elephant. If you're familiar with elephant, when they nurse, the teats on the female elephants are up by the forelegs. Same thing here with the pangolin we found. Under the front foreleg is where the teats are located. And so that young pup is nursing right now. When they're first born, they're very light in color. The scales are very soft. Thank goodness for the mother that they are soft when they are giving birth. But within about 3 to 4 hours, they begin to harden up. And then after about 2 weeks, they'll start to darken up as you can see the pup there on the left. And those scales become harder and harder as they grow up. Like I said before, we are the only zoo that actually exhibits them. This is our exhibit right here in the center. Memphis attempted to exhibit them, but they no longer do that. They weren't able to do a nocturnal type of exhibit, so we did. And then obviously we put up all of our interpretive at that time. David was one of the animals that was out on exhibit, because David was one of those unique animals that had, David's a great personality. He loves people. So we knew as a male, he would do good on exhibit. We have another young male out there now, Stuart. You've heard of Stuart. Stuart's another one of those young males that was born here at the zoo, loves people, is doing well. He makes a great exhibit animal. We don't put our females on exhibit. We do that because we are working to make sure that they're pregnant and reproducing, and we want to keep them in a back area all the time where we control their environment a little bit more than we can on the exhibit. So only males will go on exhibits right now. International Symposium, again, from a conservation standpoint, we wanted to share the information we were having, support conservation efforts out there. So Brookfield Zoo hosted a symposium in 2018. We had 60 participants, 13 countries, 17 zoos, and we spent 3 days going over the science of pangolin. We had people prepare papers that were from the field, telling them about the research they were doing out there. We had the Pangolin Specialist Group attend, as well as Fish and Wildlife staff also attended. We were going to have another symposium this year. We want to do one every 2 years, but unfortunately, the COVID issue has created a problem where it probably wouldn't be successful. So we're looking at 2021 now to do the next symposium. And if we're still having a COVID problem, we're probably going to do it virtually. But we feel we have to be getting this information back out to folks. And we also want to bring all those researchers together again. We find you get a lot more done when you can do something more face-to-face, or even as we're doing right now on a Zoom, than you can by email or snail mail, as we call it. So right now we're going to look at probably August of 2021 to do our next symposium. The other thing our consortium does is we give out grants. When they sign that memorandum of understanding that I talked about, part of the agreement is they will provide funds every year for a grant program. So each one of the institutions has to provide funds. In 2018, we started the program. We gave out over $40,000 in grants to 7 programs, 2 in Asia, 5 in Africa. Last year, we gave out over $55,000 in grants. We did, I think we did 6 in Africa and 2 in Asia. These are grants that, again, look at trying to define what's going on in the environment so we can identify what types of areas need to be protected and how we can manage them out there. We are now in the process this month of reviewing the next cohort of grants. This year, we're going to only give out 5 grants because all of our zoos were hit tremendously from a fiduciary standpoint. And so we want to conserve our funds in case there's an emergency and we need to do something. So we're only going to give out 5 grants, but we should be awarding grants by the end of September. We're evaluating the grant proposals that have come in now. The other thing that we're doing besides grants is we were going to be sending a team back over to Togo this fall, but I think that's probably going to be delayed again because of COVID. So we'll look to send them in after the rainy season in the spring of 2021. And the reason for that is we're working with the Lomé University. Lomé is the capital of Togo, and the Lomé University, there's a number of people there that are interested in studying pangolin. We have a young man named Gabriel, who is a doctor there that has a number of grad students that are interested in getting out in the field. So we're going to be training his field staff. And we're also, while we're over there, going to be collecting things like more food items. We're going to be collecting dirt, believe it or not. We want to find out what's in that dirt so we can improve our budget, our diets, I mean. And we're also going to do what are called stomach washes. We're going to collect wild pangolins. We'll do a stomach wash to get their contents so we can analyze that and more precisely understand what they're eating. We think there's a seasonal difference in the ants, believe it or not, because when we first brought these animals in, we brought in about 6 kilos of ants from Togo. They loved them. We brought in another 6 kilos the following year in the spring instead of the fall. They didn't like them at all. And so we're beginning to think that, you know, there's seasonal variation because of wet and dry seasons in the ants and the termites, which creates a different taste or different flavor. So we're trying to find out what that is again to continue to improve our diets. So there's all kinds of research that are going on. So let's talk about the pandemic that's going on, because I think perhaps some of you, if you've been watching the news when this first started, pangolin were considered as a possible source from the Hunan food markets in China. Unfortunately, you know, there's over 1 million animals that are sold a year in Asian food markets, from amphibians to large mammals like tigers. And they all go through these food markets. The highest number of exotic animal markets are found in China, unfortunately, but there's also markets in Bangkok. There's markets in parts of Malaysia. Indonesia has large food markets in Jakarta. And so where the pangolin end up and how they end up there is a question that's being researched. But, you know, when you take a look at some of these things, again, as I said, these things are sold for medicinal purposes. They're sold as food restaurants. And up until last month, they were still considered by the Chinese government as had a medical purpose. But the Chinese government now has come back and listed them as a non-resource for medical issues, which is a great step. So hopefully we can begin to change the culture a little bit. The food markets supposedly have closed down, but believe me, even when that occurs, there's a black market out there. And so we have found that the continued trade in pangolins and in other animals like civets and things like that are continuing out there. So fortunately, you know, it came up that, well, these animals came from pangolins, and what we found out in the research is that's not really true. Most of the research agree right now that the COVID-V2 virus probably originated in horseshoe bats. Now, horseshoe bats come from the Henan province in southern China. And unfortunately, you know, when these bats are collected as a food source and animals are all packed and shipped to the market, it's possible that the pangolins, civets, bats all get packed together. And you know, when that happens, you can get a lot of mixing going on. So the pangolins were thought to be an intermediary host for the SARS-CoV-2. But what we found out was when we were doing, there was research that was going on in Malaysia that found that none of the pangolins that were confiscated before they got sent to China had anything to do with the coronavirus. And so that tells us that somewhere between the shipping into China and getting to the food markets in Hunan, something occurred there. And more than likely, what's happened is, oh, by the way, this is the horseshoe bat. It's a fairly medium-sized bat. It is used in food. It's used in medical purposes. Just about every animal has some medicinal value according to the Chinese. So this is the little critter that actually, when you looked at the ancestry of the COVID-V2 virus, this is the animal where we think most of that came from. So The research conducted in 2019, like I said, suggested that the pangolins caught during the process and traded, may have been where they came from. There were no COVID viruses found in animals in Malaysia before they got sent over. And this is why they started looking at the bats as a possible source. So the pangolins are shipped to China. They get mixed with these animals. And a lot of this work in terms of coming in contact with things like SARS, which is the acute respiratory syndrome, that was an issue a couple of years ago. That work's being done by Yuzhong Chen, who is working in Harvard right now in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He's the specialist on that. He's the one that actually ended up identifying the bats as a possible source. Bats have a virus called the RATG13, which is essentially the COVID-2 ancestry. And so this is why we know there was a direct lineage to the COVID-19 virus that came from the bats. Excuse me. So unfortunately, there's still research that needs to be done about COVID-19. The food markets have supposedly been shut down. That's not quite the case, but China is taking more and more steps to stop it. We still don't have a definitive answer where COVID-19 came from. Again, we think it came from bats, but pangolins have a coronavirus. That's not the same as the COVID-19. Bats do, civets do, other vivarids. There's a number of palm civets, banded civets that live throughout Southeast Asia. And that seems to be a possible source. What's important to know is that the pangolin that come out of Africa did not have coronavirus. And our pangolin, when they came in 2014, none of them had a coronavirus. So it's coming out of Asia someplace, and it's a product of Asia, unfortunately, and we just need to find out where it is so we can make sure it doesn't come out again. Although, COVID-19 right now is here. It's here to stay. It's not going to go away. And hopefully by the end of this year or into next spring, when a vaccine is developed, it will be a vaccine that we take every year, just like we take the flu vaccine right now, simply because it's not going away. And we'll forever be dealing with COVID-19. But hopefully with the better and better vaccines, most of us will have a good chance of being immune to it. As I said before, the thing about COVID-19, if you heard it came from a lab that was developed artificially as a weapon, that is not the case. A lot of political rumors and things out there that go on that just aren't necessarily real. And we hope that China is able to keep the food market shut down and start really working on their regulatory laws. Right now, punishment for being active in exotic animal trade is sort of a slap on the hands. It's still worth it, given the money that's involved for those that are in that trade to do it, because they could get fined the equivalent of a few $100s, maybe spend a month in jail, and then they're back out again and making far more than they could make as a farmer or in any other business. So we'll just keep plugging at it now that this COVID-19 has come up and pangolin have been looked at. It makes it easier for us from the pangolin standpoint. We have seen a reduction in pangolin take in the wild, I think mainly the Asian species because of fear. But we're hoping that will be the case in Africa as well, because COVID-19 is now in Africa and has shut down a number of countries already down there. So that's kind of the story of pangolins, what the consortium has done, where we're going, what we're trying to do, and a little bit about pangolins and the COVID virus. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Bill, can we get a T-shirt?
I can get you some T-shirts. Yes, I can.
But everyone, get out to the zoo when right now you can go but the buildings aren't open and you need reservations. But when things open up, I highly recommend Brookfield and the research that it does. I once had a tour of the zoo where they were researching, what was it, mice?
Oh,
And
yes, back at the mouse house.
the mouse house,
Yeah,
because the mouse was being used because it was easily accessible. It came from the woods around the zoo, and they could investigate activity, diet. Did I miss anything there?
yeah. The program was was about a 15-year program. We've shut it down now. But it was a 15-year program to look at management techniques. I mentioned the SSP programs where all the zoos get together and manage a single population as one population, even though it may be in multiple institutions. Uh, what we do is we analyze the genetics and we try to pick the best pairing that we can to reduce the amount of inbreeding. But there was a question on some species because reproduction wasn't that great. And so it's like, well, you know, in the wild, they choose their own mate. And of course, in the wild, they can also move around. In the zoos, they can. So we wanted to study from a population that we could house a large number at one time. Would it be better to have a sustaining population and how long it would last if we manage the population genetically, or if we let the mouse choose their mates and see how long that population lasted? And then what was the genetic makeup of that population? And so that's primarily what we were looking at there. And what we found was in some species, like birds, for example, mate choice on their own is the best way to go. The birds have this sense of knowing who they should mate with and who they shouldn't. And so we found that it's really advantageous to us if we can set it up where they can have mate choice, compared to us shipping a gorilla from the Portland Zoo to the Cleveland Zoo to pair with another female, and they've never been together before. And so there's this whole adjustment period, there's stress involved. And we found that, you know, for some of these smaller species, it's actually the better way to look at things. So we've done that now. Tim Snyder, who's our curator of birds, has been working on mate choice programs for birds now for about the past 5 years, and is actually doing quite well in developing a sustaining population for a number of tanagers.
So instead of arranged marriages, these are pick your own mate.
Pick your own mate, that's right. Yep. We'll take like a flock of birds, we'll put 1 or 2 males in a large area, put 5 or 6 females in there, let them pair up naturally, move the other females that haven't paired up out, and those pairs will actually be more cohesive, they'll reproduce faster, and they'll reproduce more than if we would try to force a pairing together. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Probably too much information, right?
No, wonderful.
I have a question if no one else has one. I was looking up while you were speaking about the India, because on your map you showed, Mr. Ziegler, it's lit up quite a lot for pangolins being hunted.
Yes.
In here it says some of the places that they have it in Gujarat, they're mainly vegetarians. What do they get hunted for in India for? In those areas?
Those animals are being hunted and sold into the meat markets in Asia.
Also, they get traveled over.
Yeah, they're going out of the country. In fact, I spent a lot of time in India working with Ram Whitaker at the Crocodile Madras Bank in Chennai.
Okay.
And one of the big projects we had going on there was turtle reproduction, because India is losing all of its turtles. They're being collected and shipped out by the truckload into Asia, because turtles are another item like pangolin, where the meat is very desirable. So that's what's happening to the pangolins in India, is they're going out into Asia from there.
It's, and I guess my follow-up question to that was, I was looking at the map. There's no pangolins in South America because for them it's pretty much similar to armadillos.
Right,
So
yeah.
I guess it's not a very polite question, but I guess the number of pangolins getting hunted in Africa is because of the investments of Chinese in those areas for the dams and everything else. So there's a lots of Chinese investments in South America too. Does that
Yeah.
mean the armadillo sections are going to start plummeting? Is that what you're seeing as well?
Armadillos haven't quite made it as popular in the meat markets or in the trade in Asia as pangolins have. They've not really associated them with any medical or medicinal qualities that they do with the pangolins. The other thing about armadillo is armadillos can carry the virus for leprosy. In fact, they've actually found armadillos in Louisiana, a population there that carried the leprosy virus. So historically, people tend to stay away from the armadillos.
Oh, good. I guess. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, just as a point of reference, leprosy is not caused by a virus.
I'm sorry, you're right.
It's a spirochete, which is similar to syphilis.
Yeah. But they, they are not, they're just not considered safe, and that's probably why the Chinese haven't really gone after them.
Good for them.
Primarily in South America, the Chinese are doing, their investments are mostly in gold and ore, as well as wood products.
Bill,
Yes.
at the point where it was thought that pangolins were the vector for COVID, were they at more or less risk for being slaughtered?
Well, we thought at first that they would be more at risk, that people would just kill them wantonly because they would think that they posed a danger, but that's not been the case so far. What we're finding is that people have slowed down their consumption, and they tend to leave them alone when they find them right now. So that's a positive.
How much? Is somebody speaking that I'm not hearing? How much do they weigh?
I couldn't hear her.
How much do they weigh? Oh, wait, here I am.
I think she asked how much they weigh.
Oh, on the average, a pangolin will weigh about 2.5 to 3 pounds. If they get much, that's the white belly, the one we're working with. The giant pangolin in Africa, which I hit over here, this pangolin you see here in the bottom corner, that's that's one of the Timonids or ground pangolins, but the giant pangolin can get up to, it can get up to 70 pounds. Oops, there, we'll go back, one more slide. Right there. So this guy right here, the giant pangolin, he occurs in West Central. He occurs over to the east into Kenya, down into Tanzania. That's a huge pangolin. He'll measure in length sometimes 6-7 foot, and as I said, can weigh up to 70 pounds. The difference between that animal behavior and the rest of the pangolins in Africa above him is the giant pangolin is a ground pangolin. He digs a burrow or den in the ground and tends to stay more in open brush savanna type habitat.
Is there much visible difference between the males and the females?
No, there's not. In fact, you kind of have to learn how to sex them. Once you understand the anatomy, it's easier, but out in the field, just looking at them, you can't tell the difference.
In the birth rate that you've had in the States, has there been a semi-even split between male and female?
Well, at first, we were getting mostly males. But in the last 4 births that have occurred, we've gotten 3 females. So we, I don't know if you're aware of it, but in some species, diet makes a difference as to sex. So what we think now that we've stabilized the diet, we think we're going to see more of a long-term 50-50, but you'll go through periods of times where one year we may get 5 males and 1 female. And then a year later, we may get 4 females and 2 males. So it changes.
Did I understand you to say the diet could influence the gender of a new birth?
In some species, yes.
Huh. I haven't heard that before.
The type, the acidity of the diet, when you're dealing with some of the amphibians and reptiles, it can make a difference. Temperature can also make a difference in reptiles and amphibians too. Crocodiles are famous for, you can actually incubate your crocodile eggs and determine the sex that you want by the temperature you incubate them at.
Ah.
Bill, fantastic. Thank you. I miss you in person. And Bill and his wife Cindy and I were supposed to have dinner on a Monday. COVID took over and you were the last get together that I had to cancel. So hopefully, you know, everyone in this group get to see each other in person. But thank you for what you do. And when I was thinking about introductions, when I first went to Africa in '65, I think it was that there were 100,000 lions, and now we're down to 2,000. Do you, being a conservationist, do you ever get depressed?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's been few wins in our business. The majority of the wins that we've had have probably have occurred here in the United States, bringing back California condors, black-footed ferrets, rainbow darters, mainly because we have the funding, the capability, the people that can do it. Unfortunately, when you're dealing with developing countries and their primary goal is to survive, and you have subsistence living that lives off of the land, it's really tough to have a win there because, you know, obviously they have priorities in order to survive, and you come in, or even some of their own scientists come in and say, we really need to save this animal. And it may be something that's impacted by how they conduct slash and burn for agriculture, or it may be a product they use as a food item. And it's tough after generations and generations of doing that to convince them there's an alternative. The bushmeat crisis in Africa is still going on. And early on, we attempted to look at them and say, we can create products for you. We can create the cattle industry. We can create, you know, you can get involved with domestic animals. And we still have a generation there, although it's beginning to get less, there's fewer and fewer of them, that believe that the wild animal was the best. It had more vigor, it could do more things, and something raised like a chicken, which is what they were used to seeing, they didn't put a lot of value in. And so saving animals like gorillas and duikers and things that were part of that bushmeat issue, they're very tough. Birds, look what's happened to birds. It's just, yeah, it gets depressing once in a while. But you know what? We're in it because we believe in it. And, you know, we hope we can get support from everybody and continue to do the best that we can.
Bill, another question, and Stuart had me totally prepared for this kind of question. A woman I knew got back from Africa totally entranced, and she said, I can never go to a zoo again. Having been in the wild, I can't stand seeing animals in captivity. And I said, well, that's kind of your choice, but have you considered, will you give the official enlighten people about what zoos do besides display animals?
Well, if I wouldn't have gotten into this business if that's all we did was display animals. The zoo is a great untold story, and that's our own fault. We try to get as much information out there as we can. But zoos are probably the #3 conservation organization in the world. We're #2 or 3 in terms of funding that's provided for conservation efforts from all of our institutions, not just here in North America. You know, when it comes to, is an animal better in the wild or is it better under human care? You know, we would obviously like to think it's better in the wild, and we would love to see that happen. But when you fence off migration routes, when you use pesticides, when roads transect your habitat and there's roadkill, you know, there are so many threats out there right now that when we say living in the wild, there's very few places anymore that are untouched by man, in most cases on a negative aspect. And so, you know, I had a person tell me from a animal rights organization that's like, you know, you need to let them die with dignity in the wild.
Oh,
And I had to stop and say, you know, if it was death from natural causes, if it was death from competition, from their conspecifics, you know, that's one thing. But when the death is caused by man, whether it's a car, it's poison, whatever it may be, loss of habitat because we're utilizing it all, there's no dignity in that kind of death. And to understand these animals, to get an idea of what they need, how to treat things, how to deal with medicine in the wild, the only way to do that is have your hands on them and be able to conduct research. Now, I'm not talking about invasive research. It's not like medical research where we operate on animals and stuff. But the type of research that we do opens up avenues for field researchers to better understand the animal that they're researching. And they can do more. As I said, we're supplying a lot of information now back to organizations in Africa about pangolins that they didn't have before. And we feel that's a justification for maintaining the population that we have right now if it provides a positive in the field, in situ, for the species. So, but you know, you're going to have people that have that opinion. And PETA is an organization that does not believe in zoos. They just don't. Now, I'm going to say the hardcore PETA members because I know a lot of PETA members that support zoos. But you're not going to change their minds. And, you know, in all honesty, I don't think it's worth the effort to try and change their minds because there's only about 20% of the population that actually believe that. The other percentage of the population around the world, the 80%, is either a user of wildlife or they believe in what we do. And they're the ones that are important to work with and to be able to change their culture about how they use animals or be able to get them to support our efforts to answer some of the research questions we want to answer that would help us save the species. Long-winded answer, but
No,
no.
Shama?
I just had a quick question. I believe after China or on the East, America is the second largest market for illegal animals or wildlife and things like that. Are you
Oh,
also-
Yeah,
Sorry?
that's true. It's starting to stop. We're getting far more aggressive with our laws. There are far more animals being protected. Uh, but there's still a lot coming in. And in fact, I'll tell you, one of the things that we've done, the Brookfield Zoo, is we've introduced a law into Springfield to outlaw the use of pangolin parts, because pangolins still come in the United States. They come already ground up, their scales do, or their body parts do, and are mixed into traditional Chinese medicine and sold at traditional Chinese medicine shops. Big amounts of that came in, primarily because the pangolin part couldn't be identified. And there were no laws on the books that said, hey, anything at all that has to do with the pangolin needs to be illegal. And so once this law gets enacted, which we hope will occur this year, people will be able to go in, and from a forensic standpoint, you can take samples of some of these products and test it. And we can find, if we find pangolin DNA, we can shut it down. That law wasn't there. And so you have a lot of these activities that go on because they've either been able to bypass it or hide it. But now we're finding out ways to intervene in some of those things and stop them.
I think that's wonderful. I was just thinking there's so many people like that. What is that movie, Netflix series that Barbara mentioned, the Tiger guy? The Tiger King or whatever. Just some well-meaning person who decides to go and get pangolins and breed them here because they are cute. I mean, it's a horrible thing to say, but that's what people do. Do you ever worry about things like that? Because they won't survive that way, because people do these things out of good intentions.
You still have a number of those people out there. You know, Tiger King, absolutely. You know, of course, he's in jail now, but there's still a number of them out there. And as they said, there's more tigers in the US than there are wild in India. And that's because they breed them, and they breed them so easily. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing as far as breeding tigers. What's bad is the fact that you have people who do not have the wherewithal from a monetary standpoint to care for them properly or put them in the proper type of environments. And so you have a lot of big cats out there that are suffering. And you also have a lot of cats that are maintained in enclosures that aren't safe. So they're a danger to the individual as well as to your neighbors. I'm sure you all remember the events that took place about 4 years ago over in Ohio, where a number of animals escaped a facility over there that had to be shot. So Ohio has instituted a law now that makes it illegal to acquire a permit. Illinois has a law that was enacted a year and a half ago called the Dangerous Animal Act, and it includes tigers, so that you cannot have a tiger personally as a pet or as an individual. And they're beginning to look at organizations that said, well, I'm a breeding facility, but if they're breeding to maintain that kind of tiger population out there, I think within the next 2 or 3 years, you'll see they're going to lose their permits as well. The problem then becomes, what are you going to do with all these tigers? Some of these tigers are hybrids, tiglons. Some are inbred because they wanted to get white tigers, which is totally an inbreeding product. And they're not a part of the conservation programs, the SSPs for tigers in North America. We have 3 primary SSPs. We have one for the Siberian or Amur tiger. We have one for the Sumatran tiger, Sumatrensis, and we have one for the general, what we call the Bengal tiger or the Indian tiger. But when you don't know where the genetics of these animals that are out there come from, you have to be careful trying to incorporate them into your program. So if we're able to shut down this tiger lion kind of thing, the question then is, what happens to them? Do you euthanize them? Where do you put them? Kind of like elephants in sanctuaries, you know, that's another big issue that's out there. So it's still an issue, but United States is really beginning to tighten down all of their restrictions and laws, and Fish and Wildlife Service, along with the United States Department of Agriculture, who actually gives the permits. It's called a USDA gives the permits to actually house tigers once they're in the United States. They are becoming very, very strict now. And over the next few years, their inspections are probably going to begin to shut down a lot of facilities.
Bill, thank you for everything you do.
Sure.
And
Happy. This has been fun, guys. Thank you very much for caring and for listening. And I hope I haven't bored you to death, but you know, I think Barbara's done a fantastic job. There's no doubt about it. And her efforts and her support of the society have been our main part of being able to be involved with penguins. So Barbara, thank you so much. I can never thank you enough for it.
well, everything came together at once and it worked. So will we ever be doing release in the wild? How large would the population have to be?
Well, we've worked with the pangolin specialist group, and they have agreed that they would prefer not to release these animals ever back into the wild. If we can develop a sustaining population, we will begin to export them to other institutions and try and make that population bigger and do more education out there. But we think it's probably best not to export them, simply because even though our animals have been so isolated, there's still always the chance we might introduce something into a wild population that we really don't want to.
Because you do send animals back, such as the addex with a
Yes.
double A. I can spell that. How do you make that decision? Are you breeding to return them to the wild? Are they safe if they're returned to the wild?
When we've selected a species that we think can return to the wild, we begin to manage them differently and begin to isolate them from the other animal population that the guests see. And we do that again because we want to isolate them. We want to make sure they've not picked up something that may be very common here, disease-wise or parasite-wise, that could get transferred to the wild. So most of the animals, Przewalski horses obviously is one, Bonko have been one, golden toad. Most of the releases that occur right now actually deal primarily with amphibians and reptiles and some birds, the Ballymina. We're beginning to set up a program for the Guam kingfisher. In fact, Brookfield Zoo will be the focal point for all the institutions to send Guam kingfishers to us, and Fish and Wildlife has funded us and to build a number of facilities here off exhibit where we work with them and isolate them so that they're protected. And we hope within the next year and a half, we'll start sending Guam kingfishers back to the wild. But we're really careful in how we manage them compared to the normal guest animal that, you know, that the people see.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you guys very much.
Have a fabulous week, everybody. And next week, I think let me look this up so I'm accurate.
Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
My wonderful friend, Adam Skloot, who's the executive director, is the artistic director at Ballet West, and a beloved friend. The girls think he's my third child and the favorite one. So he has been way before anything came up with diversity has been sensitive to it, has been programming, and was so ahead of the curve because it's his personal belief in what's right. So he'll be talking next week, and I love him dearly.
We look forward to it.
Absolutely.
Bye, all.
Bye.
Bye.